Okay, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We're tackling a pretty big one today.
We are.
OSHA 1926.1201.
Yeah, 1926.1201. One of the big ones.
This is all about keeping workers safe in confined spaces.
Absolutely.
And of course, brought to you by Safety One Source.
Yeah.
We're going to try and go a little deeper than just reading the reg. You know, this is for folks who are already, implementing this in their workplace. Trying to just get a little bit more out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the ins and outs, the nuances. And really what makes it tick.
Yeah. So, I guess, we could start with a basic question.
Sure.
What is a confined space?
Yeah, that's the place to start, right? So, we probably all know, limited means of entry and exit.
Right.
Not designed for continuous occupancy by an employee.
Right.
But the real question is why, right? Why are those things important? Why do those make a confined space hazardous?
Right.
Well, really, it has to do with rescue.
Okay.
Right? Think about it.
Yeah.
If it's really difficult to get in and out of,
it's going to be really hard to rescue somebody who's been injured in there if it's not designed for continuous occupancy.
Yeah.
That means ventilation is going to be a problem potentially. It could have a hazardous atmosphere.
Right. And that's going to make things even more complicated.
Absolutely.
So, you mentioned ventilation. This is making me think about some of the spaces that are on the list that are kind of surprising.
Yeah.
You don't think of maybe an HVAC duct as a confined space necessarily, but it's on the list.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything that meets that definition. It doesn't have to be, a small space.
Right.
We think of tanks and, vessels and things like that.
Yeah.
But it could be, a large, open area,
right,
as long as it meets that definition.
Right. Limited entry and exit. Not for continuous occupancy, potential hazards. That's a confined space.
Exactly.
So we got, bins, boilers, ducts. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, it's a big list.
It's a long list. But there's also some exceptions.
There are. So let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the things that are not considered confined spaces?
Well, even though they might meet the definition,
right,
they have their own set of regulations.
Yeah.
So like excavations, for example.
Okay.
We don't consider those a confined space, even though they might be, a hole in the ground.
Right.
Because subpart P already has all the requirements for excavations.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So excavations, anything else?
Underground construction.
Yeah.
So if you're working in a tunnel, anything like that,
okay,
that's going to be under subpart S.
Okay.
And then, of course, diving operations,
yeah,
subpart Y. So they're not really exceptions, but they have their own set of rules that preempt the confined space standard.
Okay, yeah. So this is, really where knowing the regs inside and out is important.
Yes, very much so.
So you know what you're looking at.
Right.
And you can apply the right rules. So I got a question for you. This is something that comes up, every now and then for me. What happens when you have multiple standards that apply? And, besides 1926.1201, you're doing some work in a confined space.
Yeah.
And maybe there's another standard that also applies. What do you do?
Right. Well, that happens all the time, right?
Right.
You've got your confined space standards, but you might also have, if you're welding, you have all the welding standards, so you have to comply with both. It's about layering that protection, making sure you've got all the bases covered.
So in that situation, so say we're doing some welding inside a bridge pier.
Okay.
We got to deal with confined space stuff.
Uh-huh.
But we also got to think about fire safety.
Right.
Ventilation.
Ventilation for sure.
From the welding fumes.
Absolutely.
PPE.
Yep, all of it.
So how do we juggle all that?
That's where a good risk assessment comes in, right?
Yeah.
You got to identify all the hazards, figure out what standards apply, and then write your procedures to comply with all of them.
Gotcha.
So yeah, it can get a little complicated, but that's the name of the game.
So it's really all about protecting those workers.
It is.
Making sure everybody goes home safe.
At the end of the day, that's the goal.
Yep. Well, hey, this has been a really great conversation.
It has.
Really appreciate your insight on this.
Absolutely.
I think we've learned a lot about, 1926.1201.
Yeah.
But I think, if people want to learn more,
absolutely,
the reg is right there.
Right there. It's free.
Free. OSHA.gov.
Read it. Learn it. Love it.
And, of course, big thanks to Safety One Source.
Absolutely.
For making this episode happen.
Yeah.
And to all of our listeners out there,
stay safe,
and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.